everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Big Questions with Big John, the interview show where we get to talk long form with some really interesting guests, hopefully from a libertarian perspective, but all comers are welcome. Today's guest is someone I'm very excited to have on. Let me read his bio because it's impressive. I don't want to get anything wrong here. My guest is a distinguished fellow at Hillsdale College. He was a professor of liberal studies and global liberal studies at NYU, not too far from where I am right now. From 2008 to 2019, he is the author of 12 books, including his latest, The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, Unraveling the Global Agenda. He has also announced that he is running for president in 2024 as a member of the Libertarian Party. Everyone, please welcome to the show Dr. Michael Rectenwald. Mike, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Big John. How are you?
I'm fine, sir, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you because in going over your bio, there's a lot of interesting points. You've had a lot of interesting scenarios, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit about it, if you don't mind. So First of all, I noticed that in reading some of your bios and some of the work you've done, you described yourself as a former Marxist.
Yeah.
But now you're really like a pro-individualist, pro-liberty, anti-state. And it put me in mind of people like Whittaker Chambers or Thomas Sowell, people who started out like with these radical communist Marxist ideology, and yet they've come full circle, 180, half circle, I guess, to the opposite viewpoint, right, where they're now pro champions of liberty. Can you explain to me, how does one go from being a Marxist to being a big individualist anti-state? Like, what led to your conversion, as it were?
Well, yeah, I think first of all, I think it's very important to say that, you know, the opposite, the real paradigm that we're dealing with is not left and right, but it's totalitarianism versus liberty. And so in my studies in my graduate school studies at Carnegie Mellon mostly, and also Case Western Reserve, you know, I got very involved in through osmosis almost, but you know, through the kind of course curricula that were fed to me through the various courses that I took. Some of them even called Marxisms and feminisms and postmodern theory and post-structuralism, things like that. You know, I got reeled into a kind of Marxist, sort of postmodern Marxist type thinking. And started, you know, I wrote a lot of essays from that perspective. This was not my vocation as a professor. This was an avocation that I undertook in addition to my professorship work. And I was never proselytizing in the classroom ever. So, but things started to pile up in terms of the kinds of things that I was seeing on campuses, and at NYU, it reached a head in roughly 2016 in the fall. And the left was becoming more and more censorious, or I should say this kind of regime, you know, was becoming more and more censorious and very prohibitive of speech, and also establishing a bias reporting hotline on campus, and no platforming speakers, and there was just a whole line of things. And I had also had some other experiences with the identity politics, hiring practices, and other issues. But now it was starting to get like, looked, you know, with this like bias reporting hotline, it started looking like a Stasi state to me. And so I started to speak up against it on Twitter. I had an account called the Anti-PC NYU Prof.
Right.
Or as it was Anti-PC NYU Prof. And anyway, this came to the notice of a student newspaper reporter, who then asked me to do an interview, which I did. And when I did that interview as myself, because that Twitter had been anonymous, like so many accounts on Twitter or X, and I came out as myself, made these very, very damning critiques of what was going on. And then the administration came down on me first. Then a faculty group called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group came down on me. I was condemned by that group in an open letter, convicted of wrongthink. They said that I was guilty for the structure and content of my thoughts. So I
wait, hold on a second. I don't want to gloss over that.
Yeah,
that was the literal
that's the
charge
literal
against you.
Yes, I was quote guilty for the structure and content of my thinking.
That is unbelievable to me. Yeah. That an institution of higher learning,
yes,
would. I mean, that's not even stuff I think the government has the right to charge you with. Do you know what I mean? It's ridiculous.
Especially not the government. But this was an academic institution where so-called academic freedom is supposedly upheld and championed, and likewise free speech by professors outside of their roles. Certainly not something that universities are supposed to try to curtail. But here I was told that the very content of my thoughts were wrong. And that I was guilty for it. So this is an accusation of wrongthink. Then I was pushed into a leave of absence by the dean. There's lies about this on Wikipedia, so don't get it from there. NYU pushed me out into a leave of absence. It was all their idea, and I took the leave because I thought I was up for promotion to full professor. I thought I'd lose that promotion if I didn't take the leave, because they were very forceful. Anyway, then a lot of the left, I got on national TV, got on some conservative news sites, Fox and several of their programs, and then the whole left came down on me. And I saw what a bunch of totalitarian wannabes these people really were.
Right.
And likewise, I said, I want nothing further to do with them. And I instantly became what I now understand and later understood to be a civil libertarian. That is somebody that puts individual rights first and foremost. There's no collective that can overwrite your rights. There's no collective good or common good that can be used to overwrite your individual liberty. And so I then started into a deep dive into political and economic libertarianism. And by 2017, I was a full-fledged, total libertarian in all registers. So,
yeah, that's like a very, I think, relatable journey that you just described, right? That, here initially, because let's face it, I'm guessing just by looking at us that we're probably roughly of the same generation.
Yeah.
And certainly when I was going to college, the one thing you could always praise or find admirable in the left was the defense of free speech. Right. I mean, that was like, even growing up in my youth, so forgive me, growing up a Bill Buckley fan or a, like the Goldwater type of conservative,
Sure.
The one thing I would always tell my classmates, anyone who would listen, is, the one thing the left has over us is this total commitment to free speech.
Yeah.
I mean, to the extent where they, for those that have the awareness, like they defended the Nazis' right to march in Skokie, not because they believed in Nazism, but because they believed in free speech, right?
Right. That was the ACLU, yeah.
Yeah, the old ACLU, probably not today's ACLU.
No.
So, and to someone of my age, I'm sure to someone like you, if free speech was the most important issue to you, I could see where you would gravitate to the left politically, because they were really the staunchest defenders of that.
Right.
And you look around now, not that I think the right wing is necessarily entirely free speech.
Not at all.
They might be slightly better in some cases, but really politically, the left-right paradigm now has no defenders of free speech. And I think the more egregious offenders of this are coming from the left, because they have to worry about the identity politics and so forth. So your journey to me is very relatable, that, you know, you may have started out on the left or a Marxist, whatever term you want to use. And if free speech were paramount in your thought, you would be like, this is why I'm here, because even if I don't agree with everything, I have the right to speak. And now here you are at NYU. And for those around the country that may not know, NYU is not like some third-rate university somewhere in Brooklyn, right? It's considered a really, or was considered a decent college, a pretty good college to go to.
Yeah, it's a top 25 ranked university. Yeah.
Oh, there you go, right? Top 25. So to get that out of somewhere like NYU in a liberal state, in a liberal city, like, again, it's in Greenwich Village, for those of you that don't know New York City. That's where the Stonewall riots took place and everything. And here you are in this liberal bastion, and you can't speak your mind without being accused, and I still can't get over this, of having the wrong thoughts in your head. Right?
Crazy, right?
It's stunning to me. Like, if it, and again, not to paint with a broad brush, but if it happened in Texas or, you know, Oklahoma or something, you're like, maybe I could see it. It's the environment.
Yeah.
But in New York City, it's stunning to me. Absolutely stunning. And again, your journey, like the old school Marxists, their revelations came, I think, philosophically. So Whittaker Chambers, I think, when they asked him, well, how did you go from Marx? What was his quote? He goes, one night I couldn't stop the screaming in my head, right?
Yes,
like he heard the scream.
He heard the screams. And so he described this guy that had gone over, I think, to from Germany to the USSR, and heard the screaming of people being dragged out to the gulag.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
I've described my own encounter as hearing the screaming.
Yeah, and it is, and to me, as a youngster, that was a very powerful sort of statement or testimony or whatever you want to call it. I mean, much more personally, I knew all about Marxism because of my father. He said, you know, sat me on his knee as a young man. Don't ever become a communist. I hate the communists.
Oh, okay.
Why, Dad? Because in the old country, they were the only ones allowed to have guns.
Wow.
And they made the rules.
Wow.
Who ate, who had a home, who didn't. And that was powerful as a youngster. You know, imagine being 8 or 9, you know, just curious. Why do you, you know? So I love hearing how people had their transition if they started out at that point, because a lot of libertarians, as we know, don't necessarily arrive at libertarianism from the right. I mean, that seems to be some weird general perception. I don't know where we got it from.
Yeah.
But there are, especially from places like New York, there are a lot of libertarians who arrived at their positions from the left. So I hopefully your story, to a much lesser extent, my story, might help some people who are on that end make that similar journey. Okay, so looking at my notes, what I think is interesting is, now, was it at NYU where you invited Milo Yiannopoulos to speak at one of your classes?
Yes.
Okay. So for those that don't know, Milo's a character, right?
Yeah, right. That was the whole point.
Yes, exactly. And my fellow Greek there was always known for his and I mean, he was a provocateur, let's face it, right? And even if you look at him now, he's had one conversion after the other, politically, spiritually, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But that's almost besides the point, right?
Yeah.
So you invited him to speak to in one of your classes, where presumably the students attending your class knew what they were getting into, right?
Yeah, they knew about it. It was part of a segment on the idea of global culture, and so he was going to speak on the politics of Halloween, actually, is what it was going to be about. And the idea of having the liberty to dress up as another person for a night, and comparing that to the prohibitions about that, which were very rampant at the time, and there probably still are. I don't know.
Right.
And the irony there that, at the same time, the left was promoting the idea that you could change genders by day. And
so what's interesting, again, to your point, the irony, and it's almost stunning to me that they don't see the irony in their own actions, which is like, how could you accuse Milo Yiannopoulos, especially as I remember him in 2018, 2019, of being any sort of tool of a repressive society? I don't understand that. Like, for those that don't know, he was an openly gay man.
Right.
His partner, I believe, was African American. So to that extent, like, you can't pin racism on him necessarily. You can't pin homophobia on him.
That was his whole.
That was his whole shtick, right?
Yeah,
so
whole shtick, yeah.
Literally, if you were to ban him from a university campus, I'm struggling to understand.
They let him in. Oh, they were going to let him in. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So university could not stop it because it was not like a speech, an extracurricular thing. This was my academic freedom now to have a speaker on in my class. Now, this was a class of 14 students only, by the way.
Okay.
Okay. So a very small class, a seminar class. And the university sent out all these emails saying, while we deplore what's being said or what will be said in this course, in this classroom, we can't stop it because of academic freedom, blah, blah, blah. Then the mayor of New York City shut down the class. Bill de Blasio himself called NYU, or pretended to call NYU, whereas they really called him, and found a pretense for shutting down the classroom, so that we couldn't hold it.
So how did New York's first openly Marxist mayor, what was the pretense? What was the reason given for shutting down the class?
He said it was a public safety issue because there was a Halloween parade was scheduled for that night.
Okay.
But this was happening in the daytime, so I don't understand.
But again, I don't understand, and I know you didn't do this, so I'm not asking you to defend it. But again, Greenwich Village, New York City, they have one of the world's biggest Halloween parades, right? And it's just, it's almost like being in Rio de Janeiro for Carnival, right? It's like everybody's on the street, these wacky costumes, and it's a good time had by all. How did, if anything, what, I don't understand, what was the public safety issue for one man to speak to 14 students in the middle of a parade in Greenwich Village?
It's crazy. I mean, they said that the left was threatening. There were threats from like Antifa and all that.
Right.
In fact, they threatened to kill me. But I wanted to go forth with the class, and if any violence was going to occur, it was going to come not from us.
Right.
It was going to come from the other, the protesters. So it was really an abridgment of the First Amendment. And if Milo hadn't been under siege and a number of other registers at the time, he said he would have sued them because it was really a First Amendment breach.
I do see it that way, right? I mean, the only way I could even imagine that sort of excuse being used would be if you were planning on holding that class with Milo in the middle of Washington Square Park or something, like on a public piece of property where you might make an argument, right? But this is in a private institution, right? And NYU, it's not a state-owned school, right? For those that might be confused. Private university. You were holding the class on private property.
Right.
If anything, I would think de Blasio should have been on the hook to ensure Yiannopoulos' safety.
Right.
Through Manhattan to get to your class. I mean, if anything, right. So
it would have been a walk of about 200 yards from my office.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, he came to New York anyway, gave the lecture which he changed to make it more ribald. Of course, because I had certain parameters in the class. He gave the lecture from a hotel room, and it got all kind of attention. But yeah, this was just an outrage, and so that's how I finally made a settlement with NYU. However, because they figured what is he going to do next? Maybe he'll invite Richard Spencer or something like that.
Oh, wow, yeah.
I mean, which I wouldn't, but because as you said, I think Milo is actually a harmless character. And
he really is. I mean, not that I'm not necessarily a fan of his.
Yeah,
I'm
not really a fan. I wasn't a fan even then.
Right, but he's. I mean, he could certainly provide a night's entertainment for your students, if nothing else. Like again with the Richard Spencers or whoever of the world, I could see where you might have a concern, but again, not from the government.
Right.
Like if the NYU president said, look, this is going to end up in broken windows and and shattered desks and chairs and
yeah,
and we don't want our premiums to go up. Okay, to me that's a business decision.
Yeah,
fair enough. But yeah, de Blasio stepping in, or the pretense of de Blasio stepping in, is outrageous to me. All right.
Yeah, so they basically proved the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, they certainly did. They certainly did, Mike.
And this came from the state, from the government, not just, not from the institution itself. So that was a very interesting development.
Yeah.
That's how I finally closed out my career with NYU in good standing, because they actually paid me to go. So
hey, look, sometimes leverage helps, to be able to do that. And I'm glad at least that you got your settlement. But what's interesting is, and I'm looking at, before we talk about your political aspirations, you once said, I'm documenting all the craziness for future generations in case there are any, which, sounds kind of bleak to me, know. So tell me a little bit what you meant by that.
Yeah, sure. I was talking about, the onslaught of totalitarianism in our country, and the dismantling of the culture and the material base of our society, the economic base of the society. It just, at that moment, it just struck me that we were really headed to like a kind of crackdown, a decivilizational decline, a rapid implosion. So I get those kind of moods occasionally, and I document them, but I don't always think like that.
Yeah.
But I
mean, do you feel that way now?
Right, not this minute.
No, and that's fair. I think, that's a great answer. Not right now, not this minute. I think that's a great answer. You're not bound to feel, things change, right? So, yeah. So I get that, certainly. All right. So you've got these collective experiences. You've kind of, in your own mind, as in academia, which is a hotbed of Marxism, right? And of groupthink, ironically enough, groupthink and everything. You kind of emerge from that. You're now an individualist. You have zero collectivism left in your bones.
Yeah.
How did you decide to make this move to get into politics? And the reason I ask that, not that I think it's noble or not noble.
Yeah.
I look at myself. I had whatever my journeys were to get to this point of my thinking. But politics are something I abhor. The only reason I deal with them is just because they exist, right? But it's nothing I choose to do. And I view the political aspect of libertarianism in all its varied flavors as being something just to make people aware.
That's right.
Of collectivism, the dangers of it, and things of that nature. Yeah. So, and I always ask this before we get into policy positions and stuff is, what is your goal for running? Is it to make people aware of liberty, to take away the fear of liberty, which I think Milton Friedman was very wise in at least one respect, which was, he said, those who don't want liberty deep down are afraid of liberty. That the concept of being free doesn't sit well with a lot of people. Ironic. They'll say they want freedom, but they're terrified of it.
They're terrified.
Right. So is your goal, I want to make political inroads, like as the head of the ticket, at the top of the ticket? Or is your goal, yeah, it would be nice if we won more seats locally, state, whatever. But my primary goal is education. Like my primary goal is awareness. Like, or is it a balance of the two?
Oh, that's a great question. So first of all, let me address the very first question you asked us. How did I get into this? I never had any political ambition. I am not a politician at all. Okay. I'm a writer, scholar, thinker, public speaker, and so forth. But the invitation actually came to me. So I was invited or recruited to run by the Mises Caucus, in particular, the head then of the Mises Caucus, Michael Heiss. And I thought they had the wrong number. But, you know, they said that, no, we really think you would be a great representative of our mission, which is to increase power at the local level, to wrest it from the federal government and invest it in the people in the local level, at the local level. But that's the secondary aim of the campaign. The primary one is, in fact, cultural, educational. And that is to spread the message of liberty, to make more libertarians, lowercase first,
yes,
or more importantly, really, lowercase libertarians, and to spread the message of what liberty means and why it's best, why it's effectively, it's actually inherent in our beings, and we can't function without it. And a real cooperative society does not exist without liberty. And so I think I was chosen to do this largely because of my background as an educator.
Right.
And also because of my background as a former Marxist, because I think I can talk more cogently and with more information and more authority, actually, to people on the fence, and to bring them over to the libertarian lowercase position, at least. And that's because I really understand the premises of the other side, of the totalitarian side, frankly, and I think I can knock the feet from under that,
right,
from their arguments pretty easily. And so I think it's necessary to have a spokesman for liberty at the top of the ticket for the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, and to me that sounds great, because again, I would be your target audience, right? I'm not interested in figuring out. Not that I don't want you to, but it's less of a concern to me that you get to the White House,
right?
Where you'd likely be
to get to the White House, but I also would like to win the lottery tomorrow. Or today, and I didn't buy a ticket. So,
well, not only that, but but it's not just that, because I always it's almost like a philosophical question, but like, how does somebody who doesn't believe in coercion, doesn't believe in collectivism, it believes in individual liberty and leaving people alone, how does someone like that run for the most powerful coercive position in the United States?
Right. I mean, now, my answer would be something like Milei's answer is effectively, I would be dismantling, or I would just work to dismantle the very thing that I had won control over. Yeah,
exactly right. And in actuality, that's the only answer that really falls in line with our principles, right? So, but so while that is a wonderful utopian sort of goal,
that's a utopian goal.
Yeah,
sort of. I mean, it's less utopian than Marxism, because that never works.
Yes, I never thought of that. But just as there's grades of infinity, right? People have a tough time with one infinity can be bigger than another infinity. I guess you could do the same to the same premise could apply to utopias, right? Like different levels of utopian goals. But I think it's more interesting to reach the young minds, sort of like what Ron Paul is credited with doing. But I think on an even more, like, for me, I always, like, when my niece was interested in libertarianism when she was going to school, my nephew, a lot of the kids that I worked with in advertising agencies as I was coming up, I would always point them to Milton Friedman. Not necessarily because I think he's the perfect libertarian or whatever,
Yeah,
but because,
yeah.
but certainly as a starting point, and the manner in which he put across, he was very professorial, much like yourself, right?
Yeah.
So someone like that, or a Sowell, you know, that makes these ideas as accessible to the youngsters. I think people our age are gone; they're lost causes for the most part.
A lot of them are. It's a shame. I see that.
Yeah, it's like they're just okay. You know, my road's been paved already. You know, but. Yeah. But that's why I think it's so important in the universities, and why it's so insidious that universities curtail free speech and free thought, because they're getting them young. You know, they're getting them. They're making sure that they do not have that expansion of their minds to learn about different things.
It's amazing,
isn't it? It's like you couldn't draw this up.
It's antithetical to the very purpose of a university.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. So,
but yeah, okay. I mean, we plan on, you know, in the general election, and even before, to go to colleges, to speak to different organizations on college campuses, and hopefully these people they'll be liberty-minded. If not, or if they are, I hope they will bring their friends who are not so liberty-minded. And
sure.
We can talk about this, and I think I can reach them where they are because I know where they are. I help put them there in a way.
Yeah. Well, as long as you're allowed on campus and don't pose a threat to anybody, right? Like, right. But yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I think that is the way to go. And I must admit that this cycle's crop of libertarian candidates running for president, I think all of them have that to some extent as part of their goals. I mean, some are more politically oriented of the group. Right. But I think at least as a base, all the folks that I've interviewed seem to agree that should be something that a campaign should do.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about some of your policy positions. I'm going to throw these out at you.
Sure.
On the economic front, slash government spending, slash taxes, restore a free market system that allows young people a future, the elderly security by untangling the federal government from its corporate power brokers. Wow, that sounds good. Abolish the income tax, end corporate bailouts and subsidies, cut red tape, eliminate all foreign aid.
Yeah.
So this almost is a standard libertarian position, right? I will ask you this, though. The mechanics of it we'll leave aside for now. But conceptually, how do you convince a pensioner, a Social Security recipient, someone who's on Medicare, who otherwise could not afford their living expenses? How do you convince them that, hey, you know what's a really good idea? Let's slash federal spending. Let's get rid of get rid of the Ponzi scheme, right? That's Social Security.
Here's how I would end Social Security. There's only one other candidate that's touting this idea of ending Social Security, and I won't mention him because I'm not giving him any free publicity. But what I'm about to say will just put it to rest anyway. I would give back all the money that the state took from people. In other words, you can't just say Social Security is over. What about the fact that these people were robbed for years on end into the system? That money is theirs. That has to be returned with interest and cost of living adjustment. All that has to be and as adjusted for inflation. So
right.
And if that then hurts the federal government more, good. So cut something else then. So that should be paid out. And then young people should be able to withdraw whatever they've put in so far completely, and then have their be completely off ramped so that they don't contribute to it anymore at all. So people then would be voluntarily committing themselves to this program.
Right.
And I would then get rid of the employer requirement to contribute half of the Social Security. So this will give people a great deal of incentive not to be on Social Security at all.
Right. And I like the concept. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah, they know they can keep their own money and do with it what they will. I want all the money I paid in. I want it now. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that certainly makes sense to me. But I also wonder, and this dives into your second policy point on the economic front, which is, I mean, people, I think, don't realize that this also Social Security, all these entitlement programs, obviously are what drive inflation. The endless supply of dollars being printed, that
Right.
is a hidden tax on everybody. That's
Right.
hidden thievery, right? So as part and parcel of getting rid of these entitlements, right, you're also saying, well, your cost of living will go down, right?
Yes,
Because we're gonna take these useless dollars out of circulation. You're not going to have spending on the federal level, which to this day amazes me how many people don't understand the relationship between federal spending and inflation. They think, like if I listen to Joe Biden, Kamala Harris,
yeah, they're
Elizabeth
pretending.
Warren,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, they're pretending. But if I were to believe them, inflation is simply the result of greedy businesses wanting more money, right? So
Yeah, that's absurd.
it's completely idiotic, right? But so in your mind, do we need to get rid of the dollar entirely? Do we need to tie it to a deflationary asset? How would you like? It's very chic to say get rid of the Fed, get rid of the
Right.
dollar.
That's like a virtue signal for libertarians. Yeah.
Exactly. So, what's the practical approach to getting back on a deflationary sort of currency, or at least a currency that isn't easy to print up and just distribute out there?
Well, I believe in using and promoting and making legal alternative parallel currencies in a competitive marketplace. There's no reason why the federal government, in collusion with the Federal Reserve, have this monopoly over money. It's absurd. The Federal Reserve having the monopoly over money, and the federal government being their main recipient thereof. So I would say we should have competitive currencies in the marketplace. So this will erode the power. First of all, it would end the monopoly over money by the Fed.
Right.
And then people could buy currencies based on, or get currencies based on what they and spend currencies that they have the most trust in, not deflating like the dollar does on a daily basis.
Right. And it's an interesting question because I recently was talking to Jeff Deist from the Mises Institute, and we had a nice conversation. Wish it could have been longer, about what is money really, and I think that answering that question kind of plays into your solution, right? I mean, we know about gold, silver, platinum, diamonds, hard assets.
Right.
In your opinion, is crypto a possibility?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I'm not going to adjudicate between the types of crypto. I would say Bitcoin, and I'm not going to adjudicate between the various types of Bitcoin. I'll leave that to the Bitcoin experts. It's really up to the network that is receiving the currency, whether they accept it.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. So I'm not even going to adjudicate between gold and Bitcoin, silver, gold, and Bitcoin, all that. I leave that to the actual. I leave that to the market.
Yeah, look, you can almost never go wrong by leaving things to the market. I would say, like, though, it gets a little more complicated. We don't need to go into it. Is like, how do you deal internationally, right? Now what do you deal with? Then are you setting up black markets? Are you, and maybe that's an ANCAP's wet dream. I don't know.
But, yeah, it is. It is an ANCAP wet dream. They think, I mean, an ANCAP holds, and I am an ANCAP, that the black market is the only free market right now.
Right.
So I would say that you don't just necessarily get rid of the dollar, so you can use the dollar for those kinds of transactions. But I would tie it to gold, obviously.
Yeah, go back on the gold standard or something, right?
Go back on the gold standard, yeah.
Okay, good. In terms of civil liberties, role of government, you want to abolish politicized and costly agencies. So we're talking about the IRS, the FBI, the CIA, whatever alphabet soup you want.
Right.
So in your mind, given that there's an existence of a federal government in the world, because we still have to deal with it.
Right.
Out of all those agencies, are you keeping any? Do you keep the State Department? Who was it? Friedman said he could count 5 agencies, right? Like Department of Defense, State, Justice, right? Something like that. In your mind, are they all out, or is there a bare minimum to keep a night watch state, or just get rid of them all?
Well, I mean, I would go after the most pernicious ones first, and that is, of course, the Fed, but also the CIA, the FBI, the ATF, CDC, the EPA, as you said, the whole alphabet soup. Then you see what the pared down state is capable of doing.
Okay.
And then see what's necessary. And the other thing is, of course, pulling all troops out of all the bases around the world. Some over 900 bases, I think.
Right.
On last count, who knows? There's maybe a secret base in Israel,
Right.
for example. We don't know.
Right.
So I would get all those people back on our shores, and I say you do it by attrition. You knock out things, and then see other things will fall, and that's good. We like I said, if you tax Social Security the way I suggested, this would cause a huge, it would cause a shortfall of a great magnitude, and that's good because then we use that shortfall to cut other things right out of the state.
Yeah. I have to say that's an approach reminiscent of some of the more well-known CEOs in this country. I remember my own experience. I was working at J.P. Morgan when Jamie Dimon took over, and without commenting on Mr. Dimon's performance or anything, I ran the team that provided his reports. His MIS, his intelligence analytics, and I get a call one day that says, "Listen, I don't really know you yet, but here's what we're going to do. I want you to stop all your reports. Don't send a single one out for a week. Then tell me who called you to complain and who didn't." And it became very obvious. The ones who didn't call.
You were on a list, boy.
You were on a list, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a Berry's list or something. You're out. I'll find some reason to get rid of you.
Find out whether something's necessary.
Exactly. Yeah. So it sounds like you have almost the same approach to these federal agencies.
Yeah.
Let's start cutting away all of them, and then if there's a need for it, we'll figure it out, and then we'll reestablish it. Right? Okay.
Right.
I guess that could work. It's austere a little. It's radical, but that's what you're about, I guess. Here, right?
Yeah.
Promoting rigorous use of the 10th Amendment. So that's to
nullify unconstitutional laws and mandates.
Right.
Yeah.
And really just give them back to the states, right?
That's right. And hopefully drive it down to the local level, where the local levels can nullify unconstitutional laws that are imposed by the state.
True. Is there one that stands out for you that would be like, if you were promoting an agenda to do this, what would you recommend be the first one we get rid of?
Well,
which federal law do you feel is unconstitutional that's being unduly imposed on states?
I think that states are actually imposing unconstitutional restrictions on the ownership of firearms.
Okay.
So I think that's one right there.
Okay, firearms. I'm assuming things like drug use,
right?
Things of that nature.
Yes, what an individual over 18 puts in their body is entirely their business.
Okay,
and parents are responsible for those under that age.
I was going to ask you that because I've had the pleasure of interviewing several anarchists, and they take the position that there should be no age of consent.
I don't agree with that.
Right. That's a little too radical, you think, right?
Well, let's put it this way. Parents should have the right to impose restrictions on their children. So this is investing the power in the family, and that is more anarchist than it is to say the state has no right to, that the state has a right to step in and tell a parent that they can't restrict such behavior. That is a statist intervention right there.
Right. Yes. If the state does step in, do you think 18 is the age of consent, or is it older?
Yes,
is it younger?
I think it's 18.
Okay.
It's somewhat arbitrary, but you got to pick something. And this would apply to other things too, like transgender transformations of sorts. Transgendering.
Right.
I think that the parents have the right to restrict that up until the age of 18, and that they shouldn't be infringed by the state, which is trying to take their rights away from them, their rights of domestic tutelage.
Right. Okay. And again, That sounds perfectly reasonable to me, and I'm pretty sure it sounds reasonable to a lot of people, which always makes you wonder, like, then why are we arguing about it? Who's debating the other side of that premise? I don't know. Okay.
Well, they're out there. They're out there, believe me. Yeah.
Yeah, I know they exist. I just can't. In some ways, as I've gotten older, Mike, as you see more snow on the roof, I've come to the conclusion that I can't try to understand everyone. I can try. I should try to tolerate everyone.
Right.
But I can't. I'll try to persuade you, but I won't. I at some point I just go, that's your belief, and we move on.
Yeah.
COVID. I'm assuming you were obviously against mandates.
Absolutely. And that's an area where the local governments could have taken control, said we will enforce these mandates coming from the states. That's really where they came from. But yes, I would use the 10th Amendment to nullify those kinds of mandates for sure.
Right. Specifically to COVID, I happen to be a libertarian who was pro-vaccine, anti-mandate. Yeah. Was that your position, or was your position just?
It's anti-mandate. This is kind of a division between a personal conviction and a political conviction.
Right.
I think that anybody that wants to take a vaccine, take the vaccine of any sort, it's their perfect right to do so, and they shouldn't be prohibited by any means. But no one should be mandated. Excuse me, I have a cat trying to get over here.
That's okay.
No one should be mandated to. It's not my cat either. I'm babysitting it. Nobody should be mandated to take a vaccine, and and masks. I think the same thing. Similarly, social distancing. All the other draconian measures that were put in place, I think, mostly to gain a sense of what the public would bear in terms of their civil liberties being infringed.
Right. So, do you think that it was the type of illness that was being scrutinized in that situation? For example, if it was more of a visible plague, for lack of a better term, or a communicable disease that had very tangible, serious health effects, do you think there would still be this sort of position among all libertarians? For example, there's certain libertarians that on principle alone would say, I would never take a vaccine, not because I've studied it or looked into it, but if it came from the government, it must be a horrible thing, right?
Yeah, sure.
So, but do you, and then of course they're free to think that way.
Sure.
But at some point, in your mind, is there any right of a citizen to say, you running up to me and coughing in my general vicinity, if you have a communicable disease, is it an assault? Not to get all woke on you, but is it an assault? Does it present a danger? Does the government have any responsibility in that situation to say, okay, we can't force you to take a vaccine, but at the same time, we don't need you being Typhoid Mary?
Yeah, I mean, Typhoid Mary was it's not a great example, sorry, because I've read a little bit about it, and they basically used her as a scapegoat.
Scapegoat, yeah.
Yeah, but I would say this: there could be some diseases where you're getting into close proximity to another person could be an NAP violation. I'm not going to rule that out.
Okay.
I'll just say that COVID was not even remotely reproaching that.
Yeah, I can understand that position, but I was just wondering if your position extended to all types of potentially communicable disease, as opposed to something that a lot of people consider to be no worse than a bad flu, right?
I don't think the state has any business arbitrating it. If somebody violates your, somebody does aggress upon you, and you do get sick, I think you have a perfect right to sue that person, frankly. So I think the non-aggression principle should apply, and you should have verifiable evidence that some harm was done to you.
Right.
It isn't enough to say you came over near me and, you could be communicable because you won't take a vaccine. You have to prove the person is actually sick.
Right. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. We don't want government getting involved in business and by extension, big tech or anything like that. To me, that's self-evident.
Yeah.
Is there, I'll sort of turn it around on you a little bit and say, do you think there's any role that government should have in any sort of tech? So, for example, uh, you hear a lot about the government stepped in to ban TikTok, or even Trump threatened to ban TikTok because the Chinese were using it to steal personal information. Is that a role of government, or is that caveat emptor? You just let it roll?
Absolutely not a role of government, not at all.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Can you think of any situation where the government might be inclined to step in to prevent aggression, to prevent harm to its citizenry by a foreign agent, say?
On a big tech company, for example?
It could, I mean, tech might be the way we're talking about it now. Yeah, sure.
I mean, in terms of technologies, communication technologies, the state has no business intervening in it at all.
Okay.
And, you know, one of the things I want to point out is the way the state uses technology companies to enhance, augment, and increase their penetration of control. And so I would get rid of that kind of technology right away. There is a vast assemblage of corporations and NGOs and private, public-private partnerships in league with the state that are that the state is using to increase and augment and extend its powers of coercion and surveillance over us.
Right.
That stuff has got to go immediately.
I agree with you. I always have to.
In terms of self-defense, of course, when a state, when people are attacked, then if there's an existing state and it has the monopoly over force, it should respond to thwart that attack by other people. Now, I don't think that comes along. That could come into the cyber realm, like cyber attacks. If there is an agency or a government that's trying to attack citizens using cyber warfare, then that I can see when that's the only means of defense, thanks to the way things are structured, then that state has an obligation to thwart those attacks.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. You advocate for the end of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and obviously from the first part of this show, we know why. You have a very good reason for that, personal experience.
Yeah.
Also, get rid of all the environmental, social, and governance, the so-called ESG.
Yeah.
I'm assuming also you're anti hate laws, hate crimes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, hate laws are nonsense. Hate speech. Let's never accede to that concept at all. And hate laws should be, rescinded. A crime is a crime, and you can't impute intent, and there's no difference, and it's never applied evenly, symmetrically, or in any way along anything but sort of political identity politics lines, and likewise, it should be revoked.
I agree. Clearly, it's just one favorite political class using the law as a sledgehammer against an unfavored political class. Okay.
Right. Even though that unfavored one happens to be the majority.
Yes, you're right. It could be in that case. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Tell me, give me a summary of the Mike Rectenwald foreign policy.
Well, I mean, first of all, would end all foreign aid entirely, and would end all funding of foreign military funding. For example, all this funding that's being proposed, that's already gone. We've sent over $100 billion to Ukraine, not only to fund their military, but also to pay their salaries. So, I mean, and their pensions and their health insurance. All this would be ended immediately, all foreign aid. In particular, first off, is funding and military funding has got to end. So I would end all military funding to Ukraine, to Israel, to Taiwan, and the other places they have it earmarked for now.
Okay. Ending foreign aid, I get the general premise. Would you be against, and I know people could say reasonable or real, quote unquote, real, for humanitarian purposes, say for earthquake victims or for flood victims, would you be against that?
Inside or outside of the foreign aid?
Foreign to say a foreign country, say an ally.
I would be against it. I think it's robbing people to give other people money.
Right. You think there's enough private channels to do that?
Well, there would be once we stop doing this. Once we stop robbing people to the extent that we would build up a real robust economy. There'd be plenty of charity available, and that's what it should be left to. People should be voluntarily permitted, of course, and perhaps encouraged to send charity and aid to other people's. I mean, I believe in that myself.
Right.
I'm actually a Christian, so I believe in that from a Christian standpoint. But but you don't have to be a Christian to believe this either.
Right.
Yeah.
It's always interesting how charitable how charitable they are with other people's money.
Yes, very charitable with other people's money.
Right.
And we should give this and that. They deserve this and we deserve that. Isn't that interesting? So they're willing to rob somebody to give somebody else money, but they won't, they'll take your money and spend it, but they won't spend their own.
Yeah, that is, it's almost like they're virtue signaling to themselves, right? Like,
yeah, that's right.
It's kind of a weird sort of thing, but
I've said it's virtue signaling with other people's money.
Yes, there you go. Perfect. Yeah, exactly. All right, Mike, thank you so much. We're winding down the interview, but as we do, you are now fallen into the web of that part of the show that's called Silly Questions.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to throw out 5 at you. There's no right or wrong answers. It's just a fun way for people to get to know you and what you stand for. So the first one is, do you have a favorite leisure activity?
Tennis. I'm an avid
big tennis fan.
Yeah, big tennis player. I play with my son. He's 35 years old, so he kicks my ass regularly. But it's a great exercise in humility and physical exertion.
Who is your favorite tennis player?
Oh, guess.
I have no idea.
You got to know this, right?
I don't know. I'm not a big tennis fan, so if you threw out the name, I would recognize
Novak Djokovic, of course.
Ah, okay. Oh, because he refused there you go.
Novak's Djokovic.
Yeah. I should have picked up on that. I apologize for my slow synapses there. Okay. You spent over 10 years in New York City, I think. What was your favorite New York City spot for comfort food?
Oh, comfort food. There was a place called Dojo that used to be on the corner of West 4th and something. That was where I used to go for comfort food. Then they remodeled it and ruined it. Turned it into this idiotic boutique of garbage. But that was a great comfort food spot. There was also a great deli. It's very famous, but the name's escaping me right now. It's in the East Village. It's a great deli where you could go buy, what I like most is the what's that beef sandwich?
Pastrami,
stuff like that.
Yeah. I remember actually one of the places I enjoyed for comfort food, and it just by happenstance, I'm not doing this to butter you up, was right by NYU. It was something called the 50s Diner, and it was the thing where you walked in and everybody was wearing like poodle skirts and,
that's comforting.
Yeah, it was. It was like literally walking into a time machine, but they had great meatloaf and mashed potatoes and stuff like that. Yeah. So that was
Katz is the name of the
Katz's Delicatessen. Yes, very famous.
That's the one I was trying to think of.
Who, in your mind, who's the most influential libertarian thinker, author, or politician who helped mold your worldview?
That's Murray Rothbard, and especially his. I've read a lot of his work. I've read his historical work on economics, and he's a brilliant scholar. He was a brilliant scholar. But Anatomy of the State was the book that really did the explosion in my head, although I was mostly there anyway.
But that just gave you that final push, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Great. So Rothbardian Mike, that's fantastic. Okay. The greatest television series ever was?
Wow. Geez, why is this one coming to mind? I'm thinking Gilligan's Island because I'll tell you why.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it was terrible. But what was good about it was trying to cast, which I looked at in hindsight largely. It was trying to cast this kind of communalism against, say, capitalism. And so it was kind of, so it's a good study in what the TV was trying to do to us, which is indoctrinate us subtly into socialist thinking by making the millionaire out to be this buffoon,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
et cetera, yeah.
I've never looked at Gilligan's Island in that context, but now I can't unsee it. Now that you've mentioned it to me, I can't unsee it. Most of the folks I've interviewed who are running for president have said something like The Sopranos or The Wire or something like that. But Gilligan's Island, I may have to create an award just so I could give it to you for that answer. That was fantastic. Gilligan's Island it is. Okay, and the last one. Who would you say has done more to damage young people in this country? Marx, Keynes, or the average university administrator?
Oh, well, that's hard to parse out. Keynes, I think, was a closet Marxist. I would say I've got to go with Marx, actually.
Marx, okay.
Yeah, I think so many people don't recognize that they are unconscious Marxists. And that the premises of Marxism have seeped so deeply into the cultural soil of the world, and especially in particular here in the United States, that it's really it's pernicious beyond belief, and they don't see where it comes from. But it's Marx who and his epigons, his followers, who did the most damage.
Yeah. Dr. Mike Rectenwald, thank you so much for your time. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Yeah.
Please tell folks, where can they find more information about you? How can they contribute to your campaign? Let's get Mike going here to spread his teachings of libertarianism to unsuspecting and deserving young minds here. Go ahead, Mike.
Unwary youth.
Yes.
You can go to the campaign website, which is very simple. It's wrecktheregime.com. One word, wrecktheregime.com. And you could get information on me, my biography, but also all of my writings and so forth at michaelrectenwald.com.
Okay. So, and we'll have those addresses on the screen so people can definitely go over and check you out. Dr. Rectenwald, thank you so much for your time. Everyone, you've been listening to the Big Questions with Big John. Please join us again for the next episode, whoever that may be. I'm sure it'll be someone almost as interesting as Mike.